Welcome to Seeds of Wisdom and my special series, We've Been New. My name is Cheyenne Doom, and I'm an optimal IO psychologist. And what I'm doing this year is a full reading series, one book at a time, instead of my usual scattered and intuitive reading. Now, while my usual way has worked for me, I recognize that we're in a very special time right now. So I'm reading for pattern recognition. I'm reading for how we got here. And I'm reading for how the distortion gets taught so well that it starts to feel like reality. So this is Arc 1, Naming the Distortion. This arc is the foundation, it's worldview, it's psychological architecture. It's the stuff we live inside of and often don't even recognize as a structure until somebody hands us language for it. And the first book in this arc is The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. Now, the point of this podcast isn't for me to sit up here and summarize chapters like it's some kind of book report. What I'm doing is reading these texts as a way to build a public record of what a lot of us have been living, sensing, and surviving, and connecting it to what's happening right now. So I'm going to share what stood out, what it activated, and what dots it connected. Because the most dangerous thing about miseducation is that it's quiet. So before I get into what this book has been activating for me, let me ground you in some of what I read. So the introduction was written by Jarvis R. Givens in 2023. And Jarvis Givens opens this edition by reframing Woodson in a way that hit me immediately. It makes it clear that the struggle for Black education was never just about access, but it was actually concerned with the moral and ideological substance of the education Black people received once they gained access. And there's a particular line that really stayed with me. It may be of no importance to the race to be able to boast of many times as many educated members as it had in 1865. If they are of the wrong kind, the increase in numbers will be a disadvantage rather than an advantage. And honestly, this isn't a critique of ignorance because I'm recognizing what people understood of this time, but it really was a warning about that miseducation, about producing educated people who unconsciously perpetuate the regime of the oppressor. In chapter 1, which is titled The Seat of the Table, it names the root. The problem isn't that Black people weren't intelligent. The problem is that schooling conditioned Black students to see themselves as inferior. And this really wasn't just through what was taught, but it was through what was omitted. You omit African civilizations, African science, you omit African intellectual history, and then you build a hierarchy that feels unnatural. Education becomes psychological conditioning. And then in chapter 2, where it talks about how we missed the mark, it moves into that Reconstruction period where Woodson described what was happening after emancipation, being nominally free, but economically enslaved. Black people were suddenly free, but deprived of political influence and unprepared to participate in the industrial development transforming the country. And at that exact psychological moment, industrial education sweeps in, the curriculum shifts, and training becomes about labor efficiency. And he writes, what the understanding was that labor was the most important thing in life. That's what was argued. And I think about the premise of the only reason why my ancestors even existed in the context that they existed here on Turtle Island was because they were the labor force. So that's the first distortion, right? The same society that built its wealth off of stolen Black labor now positions labor efficiency as the primary educational goal for Black people. So these industrial schools, they took Black students' money, issued diplomas, but few graduates developed adequate efficiency to do what they were supposedly trained to do because they were not getting access to the same tools, the same learnings, because they were not to be made to be captains of their own industry. They were made to be continue to be the labor force of the industry. Trade unions barred them, opportunities were blocked, and industry ownership remained inaccessible. So Black people were educated, but still structurally excluded. And where do we see that today? In fact, if you look at my performance, look or listen to my performance of civility presentation, it breaks down. Not a lot has changed when you look at the percentage of Black people who have been able to shift from being the labor to creating job opportunities. And here's the thing. Classical education didn't solve it either, because advanced knowledge in literature, philosophy, or politics meant little when you were forced to function in the lower spheres of the social order. So Woodson says something pretty devastating. Higher education often only made the Negro more of a malcontent, because he could see the impossibility of success while lacking the power to alter the conditions. So neither industrial nor classical education produced sovereignty. And then in chapter 3, titled How We Drifted Away from the Truth, goes even deeper. And Woodson talks about the missionary teachers after the Civil War. And he says that they were sincere in their own right, but they had more enthusiasm than knowledge. Their aim was to transform the Negro, not to develop him. And that distinction is everything, because to transform means to mold someone into an acceptable version, but to develop means to cultivate what already exists. And nobody was telling Black people, nobody was telling them that the curriculum that they followed did not take the Negro into consideration except to condemn or to pity him. So from science, African contributions were omitted. From literature, African thought was excluded. From philosophy, African proverbs, intellectual traditions were ignored. And he notes that ancient Africans had knowledge of all of these different things, but the history was being erased. And here's the pattern. If people cannot see themselves as originators of civilization, which in this case we literally were and are, then they internalize dependency. It's just completely unnatural. So their knowledge systems are erased. They assume that they have none. If their history begins with slavery, then they are disconnected from the very legacy that is the genesis of humanity. And so by chapter 3, the argument is no longer just about schools. It's about psychological estrangement and drifting away from truth so thoroughly that distortion feels like reality. And when I read that, I could not unsee my own life inside of it. It took me decades for me to recognize that I was put onto a path that was mistakenly presented as the path to success. If you consider the path to success to be the path of success to be, purchasing a home, to have certain titles like, a VP title, if you consider success to be having lots of zeros in your bank account, then that is great. But what happens when that type of success that you have been taught to value as the only type of success, what happens when that is taken away from you? In mid 2023, I experienced my first layoff. And honestly, at that time, I sincerely thought that I was going to get back into another job. If someone would have told me that I would not actually be traditionally employed until, let's see, January through May of 2025 as a part-time student intern in connection with my graduate school degree, I would never have believed that. In fact, if you would have told me I was going back to grad school, I never would have believed that. I was put into a very, very affluent school system in the middle of 6th grade. And prior to that, the elementary schools that I went to, by and large, hardly had any students that looked like me. And so I get to junior high where it's really not looking like me. And then on top of that, knowing that I'm living in an apartment, with my 2 other sisters and my single mom, I'm having to walk to school every day, 3 miles there. And then by, let's see, my junior year, where I'm working full time in a Christian bookstore, I'm having to take the bus slash walk to work from school. My classmates are, driving luxury vehicles and whatnot, and I'm riding the bus slash walking. Okay. So I think about that. I think about how, like, being a have not, but having around me nothing but haves, and seeing that these haves don't look like me, seeing that by and large, what the images that are being portrayed on screen through media, that the students that I'm going to school with don't really know much about me. And yet everything I've been taught has centered has centered a culture and a people who do not know anything about me. I'm not seeing anything to show me or to teach me what value that me or my people have brought to civilization. I think about that. I also think about how I'm at this affluent junior high and then high school that is to make me look very, very attractive to the outside world. And it is a marker for, again, I didn't really fully grasp this at the time, but that this was a marker for the trajectory that I maybe could have, right? If you go to this really great school, that means that you should hopefully go to a really great college, right? And so I think about how, just from the moment that I can remember speaking, being taught not to speak Ebonics, being corrected if I tried to speak in a way that was similar to the other Black children. I think about kind of what that set up for me on, like, talking quote unquote Black, speaking in a certain way is bad. Speaking in this other way is good. Seeing that I was born in LA, born in the Black and brown neighborhoods that were not really invested in, living in apartments, not really all that nice, but it was community. And I think about, as I got older, and us moving to cities where there were less and less people who looked like us, I think about the messages that sent. Um, I think about the stereotypes that were present at the time, and recognizing that I was one of few, in the flesh Black people, what that meant for me, and how I was to carry myself and how I was to present myself. I think about how that influenced the ways that I showed up in my classrooms, making sure I'm on time, not being late, making sure that I am on top of my shit, making sure that I know what I'm talking about, because it was instilled in me very early on that I could not be Black, and I knew that I could not afford to be mediocre. I knew that I could not afford to half-ass things. I learned that. I ended up applying to Spelman, to the Air Force Academy, to the University of Miami, and I feel like there may have been like one or two other schools. I got accepted to all of the schools that I applied to, and where I really, really, really wanted to go was Spelman, and I'm pretty sure that was influenced by watching and growing up watching A Different World, and also yearning for a space where I was actually around people who looked like me. Where I landed on was Johnson Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island, a school that not a lot of people have heard of unless you are in the culinary space. And so then I go to a school that, again, is not as known, while my counterparts are going to UC LA, UC Berkeley, USC. They're going to Yale, and they're going to Harvard. They're going to all of these expensive schools that are going to just continue them on the trajectory of being haves, while I'm continuing on the trajectory of the hopes for being a have myself. And going to business school, learning all the things that have to do with business administration. Ironically, my bachelor's was supposed to be in entrepreneurship. And that was one of the things that actually attracted me to Johnson & Wales University, was that they had this entrepreneurship undergraduate program where you would get to do a practicum where you were basically getting to run your business and getting that hands-on experience on what that is like. And I ended up switching my major prior to my junior year. I don't know if it was in connection with me working full-time at a regional bank at the time, but I ended up switching over to financial services management, where, basically this is where you learn how to invest. You learn, this is the path you go to if you're going to be one of those people who takes the Series 7, if you're going to be um, providing people with life insurance, if you're going to be a banker. That's the path that I ended up going in. I ended up coming back to California and applying for jobs, and ended up back at a regional bank known at the time as Union Bank of California, right back in, and the first role that I had there was right back in being a teleservices team lead, which was just basically a glorified supervisor. And I think about, like, when I was looking around at leadership and management and who inhabited what roles, it was very clear to me, while I did see leaders who looked like me, it was only within certain kinds of roles and certain kinds of capacities. And when you got further up the chain, it was a very different story. It was a very different story because at that particular time, we didn't really have social media the way that we have today. We didn't have anything that was telling us or showing us that we needed to be banding together within these spaces that really had zero to little visibility of us in leadership. I was actively being taught by my mom not to associate with the other Black employees. I was actively being taught to differentiate myself. And that was like a theme that followed me, from through my childhood, through the ways that I showed up within corporate spaces, and just making it clear that I was smart, that I was educated, that I was not just a frontline employee. And really what that was me acknowledging that when it came to frontline employees, it was very, very clear on who the frontline employees would be and who the leadership would be. As I think about it, I didn't really see Caucasian people in the frontline employee roles. I saw them in leadership roles. I didn't see them climbing. I didn't see them having to climb the ladder the same way that I did. Our entry points were vastly different. I was having to demonstrate and showcase my capabilities in a very, very different way than my peers and my counterparts were having to, even though I was actually college educated. It's like having those book smarts, having those business smarts were still taught from a lens and a framework that didn't actually speak to what the real world dynamics were going to be for me as a Black woman in corporate spaces. And there was nothing speaking to how I could actually navigate and properly move to leadership roles. If there were Black employees that I saw in leadership, I did gravitate towards them, but I also recognized that even those Black employees who had maybe these more impressive looking titles, they still were not real decision makers. They didn't have real seats at the table. We were only able to just relate to each other and look out for each other, but we didn't have any real institutional power. Yeah, that was definitely something that I had noticed and picked up on early on. And you realize that if you come as your Black ass self, your true self, if you come as a people who understand truth, justice, like who understand what things actually mean, but you also simultaneously understand that you live in a country where what is said on paper isn't actually what is meant, then you start to also learn that, like, oh, I've got to censor myself. I've got to be really careful. And then you start to develop, this persona, and this performance, and this, kind of protected shell of yourself that has been made safe and palatable within this space, because you know that if you don't present in a certain way, then you're going to be blacklisted. You're probably not going to get the opportunities like your counterparts. That's something that I experienced many times over. I'm a very, very intelligent person. I could run circles around people that I was actually reporting to. But because I was a young Black woman on top of that, like, it's just the people I was working with at the time were not actually ready for who I was and what I brought to the table. And I learned that my brilliance was actually contained. I found myself excited with the autonomy that I had earned for myself because of, building solutions and geeking out on things that made life for myself and my peers easier. But I was also able to do those things because it made the leaders that I was reporting to look better anyway. So of course they were going to let me do that. And then I think about, like, so I'm developing and I'm doing all of these things, and I'll never forget. I've literally built an entire framework, all the tools, bells and whistles, training, everything. No one told me to do it. It was something that I did. And I did this in service to an executive who had recently come from JP Morgan Chase. And she shared with me that what I built, they had paid $250,000 to external consultant for. And here I was getting paid, I think at the time I was making $100,000 a year. I was not getting paid any extra for this. This didn't show up as a bonus or anything. I'm sitting here developing something that they would pay an external consultant $250,000. And yet here I am building this within the scope of my own role that wasn't even a part of my job description. And then when I actually applied for the official director role to lead the team of people who were doing the things that I did as the very first person in that pilot and pioneering role, the person ultimately ended up hiring one of their former colleagues from JP Morgan Chase. So it was never going to be me, even though I was the most qualified for it. So this is something that I experienced time and time and time again, spinning my wheels, being better than, doing all of these things, dotting my I's and crossing my T's, and it not being enough. I saw something the other day on Threads. It was something to the effect of, we, as in Africans who had been enslaved, we didn't come here for opportunity. We were the opportunity. And when you think about, like, going from, like, your blood, bones, lineage, culture, like everything, the essence of you, everything about you has been stolen and exploited to build the wealth of this nation. And you were told that you are not even human, that you do not matter, that you bring no value to the table, and that your people never contributed anything worth a damn of society. When you are being told that, and you are not only being told that, but it is also, like, amidst extreme violence, and then you are now told that you are free, but there's, like, literally nothing that is set up for you to be able to actually function properly in this society that you were unwillingly brought to. And you're seeing around you that education seems to be the way to go. If you want a better chance in life, like, you're going to go and seek that education. You're going to go and mimic what you see in your mind, the successful people to be doing. Education actually is so, 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 so important. It is so, so, so important. But I think in the context of here, and what we're now coming to understand, is that education has been hijacked and it has been warped, because we are in a society by a people who value something that is not actually natural or in alignment with humanity, let alone the needs of us as Black or African people. And so we are being taught ways that are incongruent with our ability not only to survive, but to actually thrive. We are being shown what is and isn't okay. We're being shown what is considered successful versus non successful. And most of those indicators and markers have literally nothing to do with actual value or actual principles. And while a degree, so that's the thing, like all of the job, a lot of the job opportunities that you see at a very bare minimum, you need to have some type of level of degree. And we also understand that this is to weed out into, again, it creates like this class system, honestly, where it's like if you weren't privileged enough to have a certain level of education, then you can't even step into these spaces. But here's what I am learning. So I've got my undergraduate degree. I now have my graduate degree. And in the context of success, by the old ways of defining it, I'm not actually successful. But as I think about where I am today in my liberation journey, when I think about what I now know to be true and what I understand and what my role and my purpose is here, it's like I know that all of that education, all that experience was necessary, but I was never going to be what I am not. I remember like trying to envision like what a future me looked like, but like for whatever reason, like that vision was never super clear to me. Like it was very, very shallow. It's like, am I seeing myself dressed like Claire Huxtable? What am I actually doing? What does that actually mean? And it's because like success and my vision for the future was based on something that was very, very shallow. There was nothing in that spoke to how am I building a legacy for me and my people? How am I building true wealth? How am I reconnecting to actual truth? How am I honoring my wholeness and my humanity? How am I helping others to do that? How am I moving in a way that does not make me dependent on the very system that has been lying to me and my people for generations on end? How do I get myself out of in order for me to be able to make my living, in order for me to be able to have the quality of life that I would like to have, to be able to do the things that I would like to do, how do I do that in a way that doesn't require me to diminish my light, to pretend to be someone I'm not, to perform civility when I really understand things? I'm living in something that is probably the most uncivil, to be quite honest. Like, how do I not perpetuate and amplify and uphold this lie that is keeping me from actually being a job creator, an opportunity creator, a real bridge builder, instead of doing busy work and basically stroking the egos of those I report to, making them look better, and ultimately just serving the bottom line of board members and leaders and power structures that really could not give a single damn about me or my community or the long-standing years of inequity and injustice that continue to push me and my people further and further away from the very value that the very value of the blood that runs through our veins, that our ancestors actually built for this nation. The thing is, it starts with awareness. If you are applying for roles and your objective and your goal is to just make as much money as possible, to do whatever it is that you have to do to get into those spaces, but it is not actually grounded in any real purpose, then you are going to find that when push comes to shove, when you are asked to do things that maybe don't feel good in your spirit, you're going to have to make some tough decisions, and you're going to find that it's harder and harder for you to reconcile the things that you do. If you understand that, so the civil rights movement, that was in the 60s, right? And prior to then, you got to think about the landscape of white collar jobs and white collar work. And you got to think about who is inhabiting those spaces by and large. And you think about the civil rights movement and the push for equal opportunity and employment and all of that. Cool. So now you've got this influx of Black Americans who have gone and chased the education of their white peers in the hopes that that is going to make them successful, that's going to give them some economic opportunity and advantages that they had not been privy to prior. But the problem is the people that they're going to work with have not been socialized or taught to actually welcome in this influx of people who do not look like them, an influx of people who they themselves have also been taught bring absolutely no value to this country, no value to humanity or civilization, right? So they're being brought in under these narratives of affirmative action and all this kind of stuff. DEI, didn't earn it is what they like to say, or maybe we're saying didn't earn it. I don't know. But at any rate, like, I think about the worldviews and the mentalities that have already been shaped. And these are the mentalities of people you have to work with. These are the mentalities of people you have to work for. These are the decision makers who are deciding whether or not you can even come into the door. And better yet, once you're in the door, what kind of mobility you would even have within the organization. I would say if you're going to go into these organizations where you don't really see yourself represented within leadership, executive leadership, board of directors, just understand what you are setting yourself up for. And nobody's going to say this to you because none of these organizations are going to put themselves on record to say that they inherently engage in organizational injustice. That is going to be something that you yourself have to figure out after you've spent years and years and years and years of being taught that assimilation is the way, after you have invested thousands and thousands of dollars in education and leadership training and whatnot, only to not actually be able to get a return on investment within those very spaces that you are being trained to inhabit, because no one has taught you how to inhabit those spaces as someone in power. You all have to be mindful that basically you're trying to turn yourself into what you have been taught is successful, is the norm, is proper, is the way. And if you understand what that means, what you really understand is that means you are trying to present yourself as a white cisgendered male. And that's not who you are. And the actual white cisgendered male doesn't have to be anyone other than himself. And he's able to inhabit who he is because also everything is set up and structured in a way that supports him, that amplifies him, that uplifts him, that gives the benefit of the doubt. He is the default. So he's going to move very, very differently through that. And here you are trying to be someone that you are not when you, as Paul Mooney would say, don't even have the protection of the complexion of the collection. And you're basically, when you do that, you're really setting yourself up for a lot of confusion, a lot of misalignments, a lot of cognitive dissonance. And then you are also starting to condition yourself to see yourself as a failure because you are trying your hardest, but it's not really working. And you realize, like, well, why did I do all that? And so I would say, like, if I could have done something differently from the start, it would have been to understand that I am never going to be white. I am never going to be a white man. That I am and have always been the authoritative power voice that I need. I've always been capable. I've always been intelligent. I've always been smart. And if I would have moved more in that energy of knowing who I am and not being afraid to associate with others like me for fear of maybe being miscategorized, or even worse, like moving in that spirit of lack of, well, there are only but so many opportunities and there's only but so many of us that they're going to give this to. Even if that is true, I could have moved differently. And I probably, to be honest, probably if I was to go back even further at 19, 20, when I made the decision, to switch, my major, I probably would have stuck with entrepreneurship, because in the end, because I didn't actually have that particular education, I am now having to learn what self-determination truly is. It's like, basically, I've learned the hard way of what it looks like to go down a path that is just not natural with you. And now it is my journey of relearning and re-educating myself and liberating myself and connecting to the brilliance that has always been within me and my ancestors and my people. Like that's what I really need to be drawing on in order for me to be successful in my self-determination of making a living and supporting myself through my gifts and offerings in a way that is congruent with me, and in a way that also serves a bigger and a deeper purpose for myself and for my people. I would have stuck with entrepreneurship because it would have allowed me to actually understand what it means to be free and what it means to be sovereign. It would have taught me that I am and I have everything that I've ever needed. It would have shown me that I didn't need to operate within the confines of roles that I was performing for. Like when you're working for someone else, when you are exchanging your labor in that kind of way, first of all, you're tying your health, your way of life, your standard of living, you're tying that to that employer. That employer is telling you how you are allowed to present yourself and show up, not just in the workplace, with the code of conduct. You're being told how you can dress, what you can say, what you can't say, when to show up, when you can't show up. And if you do anything that's not in alignment with what they say you are and aren't allowed to do, you're going to get written up. You can be fired. And on top of that, what you do outside of work is even up for grabs and dictated to you. I'm a Xennial is what they're calling them, the Gen X slash millennial. And for us, like, I've literally lived through the evolution of social media. And I remember there being this distinct moment in time where it was like, be careful about what you post on social media, because your current employer and future employers can find that. And I remember like having to be mindful of like not having pictures of myself drinking, right? Yet I'm seeing pictures of white leaders that I reported to or didn't report to that are having those types of pictures as their profile pictures. And that's completely normal. That's completely fine. When you are conditioned on into this kind of mentality, it then puts you into this frame of mind of like, at least for me, of like what you'll get in trouble for. I will find myself like I would think, oh, I will get in trouble if I do that. If you're an entrepreneur, who is telling you you're going to be in trouble? Like, if you are in control of your own destiny, if you get to dictate when and how and where you show up, what type of projects that you're working on, what type of work that you are doing, where and how you're going to invest your money, where you're going to receive investments from, that is a whole different ball game. And what also happens with that is it no longer makes you beholden to the agenda of those who are giving you the opportunities. And I think that is something really important, because when you are an entrepreneur, it is about your value system. It is about what you believe in. It is about what you are about. And when you are operating in the other construct, You are aligning yourself to what they are about. Whether or not you believe their values or not, you are still having to perform as if you do. And that creates a separation of self that slowly chips away from you. I don't think it's as easy as saying like it's about money or about control. I think it is about sovereignty and self-determination, which ironically is something as African or Black Americans we have really and truly not been afforded is self-determination. In fact, there was actually a quote that I came across by Sam Ossipal. He was a director of philosophy and, in fact, self-determination theory. This is a quote that I came across at the end of my first semester in grad school when I was formulating what my treatise was going to be about and what my central focus was going to be. Inherent within most of the career theories has been the element of choice. Our civilization has evolved to the point that in Western society, at least, we possess an element of choice concerning the activity with which we will occupy ourselves. Though the variety of work from which we may choose varies from broad to narrow, one of the most highly prized freedoms within our culture is the right to decide what kind of work we will do, for whom, and when. Although we do not always exercise this freedom, the potential of choice is highly valued. So that's where I am, still early in this text, still early in this arc, but already seeing how deliberate the conditioning has been. Woodson was naming something so structural, and reading it in this moment makes it impossible to pretend the patterns are accidental. Education shapes imagination. Imagination shapes possibility. Possibility shapes what we believe we are allowed to build. And when those foundations are distorted, everything built on top of them carries that distortion. So I'm going to continue in the next chapters, and we'll keep mapping this together. I'll see you next episode.